Good morning, students. So, today I shall be starting with a new topic, that is waxes used for dental applications or dental waxes. Okay, and so I'll be starting with the classification of waxes. So, waxes can be classified according to their application. Now, based on the application, waxes can be classified as pattern waxes and also processing waxes. Now, what do you mean by a pattern wax? So pattern waxes are used to fabricate a restoration using lost wax technique. So now to explain that, a typical example of pattern wax is actually the inlay wax. So as I told earlier, inlay wax is an example of pattern wax and it is used to fabricate a restoration using lost wax technique. Okay. So basically the inlay waxes that is given an ADS specification number 4 that is used to form a carved pattern or a carved wax pattern that is of the exact same size and shape of the final fabricated restoration. That may be a metallic restoration, that may be a ceramic restoration, or maybe an indirect composite restoration also. Okay. So it is used to form a carved wax pattern that duplicates the exact same size and shape of the final restoration. And this wax pattern will be replaced by a definitive restorative material such as acrylic, metal, or ceramic. Okay. And how it is replaced by a definitive restorative material means that is through the lost wax technique. Okay, lost wax technique that is mainly for metallic restorations. It is lost wax technique, but for composites and the ceramics, we have other methods also. Okay, so so that is actually basically the an example of a pattern wax. So pattern wax are used to fabricate a carved pattern or a wax pattern that duplicates the exact size and shape of the final restoration. And finally, it is replaced by a definitive restorative material that is actually via the lost wax technique. And the lost wax technique is a method of using a wax pattern to define a space within a stone-like material which eliminates that pattern and then cast the space into metal. Okay, so that also I'll explain. So basically, lost wax technique means that first of all, you know that in the casting procedure, after fabricating the wax pattern, you are attaching the sprue former. Okay, and then it is attached to a sprue base or a crucible former, and then a casting ring is actually placed to the casting ring liner. Okay, and then you are investing the casting ring. Then after that, then there is a burnout. Okay, so that is why while burnout, we find that this wax pattern is eliminated. The wax is actually lost, and then as a result, we are actually mainly getting a space within this investment material that is actually of the exact size and shape as that of the wax pattern. So it is a wax pattern is defining a space within the stone material or the investment material that is actually called as a mold space into which the molten metal will be forced using a casting machine. Okay, and and as you know, the sprue former will be actually forming a channel through which the molten metal can enter the mold space. Okay, so that is what you mean by pattern wax. And the typical example of pattern wax is actually the inlay wax. Okay, there is an inlay wax and then there are casting waxes and also base plate wax. Okay, so the casting waxes like your inlay waxes, they are commonly used to construct the wax patterns for removable partial denture framework. Okay, RPD framework. And then this wax is actually this wax pattern that is actually applied to a refractory cast framework. So and then it is actually invested and cast using lost wax technique. Or refractory cast means that that will be able to withstand the very high temperature. Okay, and and then it is invested and cast using the lost wax technique. And another example of this pattern wax is actually the base plate wax that is used to fabricate the base plate of a denture that will determine the contour and the boundaries of a denture and also hold the denture teeth in position before it is actually mainly replaced with acrylic. Okay, so when I classify the pattern waxes, I basically have the inlay wax, then I have the inlay wax, then I have the casting wax, and then I also have the base plate wax. Okay, now I told you that waxes that are actually used for dental applications can be classified into pattern waxes and also processing wax. So next is actually the processing wax that includes the boxing wax, beading wax, utility wax, and sticky wax that I shall be dealing in detail in later. And these waxes are actually used as auxiliary materials. That is, they aid in making of castings or impressions or during soldering. So the typical example is actually basically the boxing wax. And yes, you can see that this boxing wax is actually basically having a tacky consistency. Okay. And they can be actually molded around an unpoured impression. So that will actually help to contain the dental stone when we are actually pouring the cast or when it is actually vibrated into the impression. Okay. And then we actually also have utility waxes or periphery waxes that can also be used in combination with boxy waxes that also have a tacky consistency, so that they can be also used for extending the borders of impression, and they can also be used to line the borders of the impression tray so that we can make them less irritating to the oral mucosa of the patient. Okay, so such auxiliary waxes that are actually used for auxiliary applications and okay, and so the waxes can actually also be classified actually based on their source of origin. Okay, source of origin, and therefore waxes obtained from various natural sources. So first we have actually mainly natural waxes that are obtained from natural sources such as actually plants, insects, animals, or they are actually the mined from their ores. Okay, and also from petroleum, and they can also be synthesized artificially from polymers. So natural sources and also they can be synthesized artificially. And now coming to the composition of dental wax. Now we find that actually the two principal organic compounds that are actually found in wax are actually the hydrocarbons, straight chain hydrocarbons, and also esters. Although some waxes may also contain some free alcohols and acids as well. Okay. Now the waxes used in dentistry, when we are looking, we find that they all have a basic component or a foundation that is actually composed of natural waxes, to which we can actually add some minor additives. Okay, so the basic component or the major component will be a natural wax that can be either a single natural wax or a combination of natural wax, to which we find that some additives will be added. So, for example, paraffin wax. Most of the waxes that are actually used for dental applications have paraffin wax as a basic component. So, waxes used in dentistry contain single, multiple natural waxes as actually mainly basic components. For example, paraffin wax. Now, to that we find that actually small amount of additives are actually mainly added. Okay, to modify the properties such as synthetic waxes. Then resins can be added, oils, fats, and coloring agents can actually also be added. Coloring agents are added in very minute quantities, less than 1%. So the major component will always be a natural wax. That is most cases it is paraffin wax or a combination of many waxes. Okay, and this is actually a table that is actually taken from your restorative dental materials textbook, Craig, that is given by Craig, and there you can see that based on the source, even natural waxes, you see that there are actually different sources, minerals that are actually mined from their ores, plant, insect, animal, etc. Okay, then there are synthetic waxes that can be manufactured from polymers, and then there are actually also some additives that are actually added to modify the properties, like stearic acid, fatty acid, glyceryl tristearate means that it's a fat. Okay, and then we have oils, colorants, then resins, and also synthetic resins. Okay, so basically the major component is a natural wax, and to that some minor additives like fats, resins, pigments, and synthetic waxes will be added. Okay, and okay, so now we are actually mainly coming to the so now I'll be explaining in detail about the different natural waxes, okay, that are actually added as the major component to wax. Okay, for major component to dental wax. So first we can actually mainly start with the paraffin wax. Okay, so as I told earlier, in most waxes that are actually used for dental application, paraffin wax will be actually mainly found in the major component or the base. Okay, so that is actually mainly 40 to 60%. Okay, 40 to 60%. And what is the source of this paraffin wax? So the paraffin wax is actually mainly collected during the distillation, the fractional distillation of petroleum. Okay, when the fractional distillation of petroleum, it is actually collected from the high boiling fraction. Okay, high boiling fraction during the distillation of petroleum, and they are actually mainly straight chain hydrocarbons with 26 to 30 carbon atoms. Melting range is actually ranging from 44 to 62 degrees Celsius. Okay, And the melting temperature actually mainly increases with actually mainly increasing molecular weight. Okay. Now, during the solidification and pouring, we find that there is always a volumetric contraction. Okay, whenever we find that we are manipulating the wax with actually mainly the hot instruments, and after that, during cold cooling, there will always be a contraction. Okay, and it is not pure, and it is always difficult to isolate a single molecular weight hydrocarbon. So whenever we are actually carving this wax pattern, we find that it flakes and it actually mainly easily. Okay, it flakes and actually breaks away easily when trimmed and does not achieve a smooth and glossy surface. Okay. And the second component that is actually usually added is actually the natural gum damar, or it is actually not a wax, it is a resin. Okay, gum damar or damar resin. So this is actually mainly a natural resin. Now, why is this gum damar added to inlay wax? So sorry, to paraffin wax. So like they will be asked in the Viva point of view. So what is the function of this gum damar resin? So it is actually added to paraffin to improve the smoothness in molding and to render it more resistant to cracking and flaking. So in the previous slide, I had mentioned that whenever we are carving the inlay wax, we find that it actually mainly cracks or flakes, isn't it? It is actually mainly cracking and flaking. So this actually mainly makes the manipulation of inlay wax actually more easier, and it is actually makes it more resistant to cracking and flaking. And it also increases the toughness of the wax, okay, and enhances the smoothness and also the luster. It gives a glossiness to the wax. Okay, then we have, so basically gum damar is added to make it more resistant to flaking, and it actually makes the manipulation easier and adds a glossiness or a luster to the wax. So now another major component is the carnauba wax. Up to 25% they has added. Now carnauba wax, or actually palm wax or Brazil wax, that is obtained from the leaves of the palm Copernicera prunifera, that is actually found in northeastern Brazil. So these are actually also composed of straight chain esters, alcohols, acids, and hydrocarbons. Okay. Now the main function of this carnauba wax, and also the next wax I am going to mention, that is Candela wax, is actually the high hardness, toughness, brittleness, and the last point, very high melting range of 65 to 90 degrees Celsius. Okay. So that actually mainly increases the melting range and the hardness of paraffin wax and decreases the flow at mouth temperature, especially when it is used in direct technique. Direct technique I shall be explaining the detail later. So carnauba wax actually mainly contributes to greater glossiness to the wax surface than the damar resin. So the main function is the first point, increasing the melting range. That is the most. When you are asked for the Viva also, first you have to tell them. Then it improves the hardness of paraffin wax and also decreases the flow at mouth temperature. Okay. And while increasing the melting range, it also decreases the flow and then the hardness, and also like the gum damar, it also contributes to the glossiness, but to a greater extent when compared to that of the damar acid. Okay. And then we have the Candela wax. It almost serves the same function, obtained from the leaves of the Candela shrub. Okay, that belongs to the Euphorbiaceae family in northern Mexico and southwest USA. So that actually mainly contains hydrocarbons, 29 to 33 carbon atoms, alcohols, acids, esters, and lactone. Melting range is also very high, 68 to 75 degrees Celsius. Candela wax provides the same general qualities as carnauba wax, but its melting point is lower and it is not as hard as carnauba wax. So please remember the same functions but to a lesser extent. Then we have Cerasin 10%, that is typically white wax that is actually extracted from ozokerite. Now, what is ozokerite? Ozokerite is a mineral ore that is actually found near petroleum deposits in Central Europe and Western USA. Okay, they contain straight and branch chain hydrocarbons. They have a high molecular weight and greater hardness than paraffin wax, increases the toughness, improves the carving characteristics, prevents flaking, and increases the melting range of wax. Okay. Then we have beeswax that is added in minor quantities. So primarily it is actually mainly insect wax that is obtained from the honeybees of the genus Apis. And the wax is formed into scales by 8 wax producing glands on the abdominal segments of the worker bees. Okay. Now it is actually a complex mixture of esters consisting of milcyl palmitate, okay, milcyl alcohol and palmitic acid. That is when we are getting the ester, along with saturated and unsaturated hydrocarbons and high molecular weight organic acids. And it has an intermediate melting range of 63 to 70 degrees Celsius, and it is brittle at room temperature but becomes plastic at body temperature. Reduces the flow of paraffin wax. Okay. And then finally we have montan wax, that is a mineral wax that is obtained from lignite, that is brown coal. The composition and properties are similar to plant waxes. They contain long chain esters with 40 to 58 carbon atoms, alcohols, acids, and resins. And the melting range is 72 to 92 degrees Celsius. It is hard, brittle, lustrous, and blend well with other waxes. Okay. Substituted, and it is substituted for plant waxes to improve the hardness and melting range of paraffin waxes. Okay. Then we have microcrystalline waxes. They are actually obtained from heavier oil fractions of the petroleum industry and contain branch chain hydrocarbons, have a high melting range, tougher and more flexible than paraffin wax, and less volumetric change in solidification, and reduces stress that occur during cooling due to the less volumetric change. Then we have synthetic waxes. You don't need to know it in detail, just know the names. Okay, polyethylene waxes, polyoxyethylene glycol waxes, halogenated hydrocarbon, hydrogenated waxes, wax esters from reaction of fatty acids and alcohols. Okay. And so basically I told you that pattern waxes in your when I referred your previous university question papers, I found that the most frequently asked question is actually the inlay wax. Okay, the composition of inlay wax, classification of inlay wax, manipulation of inlay wax, properties of inlay wax. Okay, so usually they can be asked as a long essay and also short essay. It can be asked as a short note also. Okay, some properties like glass transition, temperature. Okay. And as I told earlier, inlay wax is actually used to form a wax pattern that duplicates the exact size and shape of the final restoration that will be replaced by a definitive restorative material. Okay. Now the composition of inlay wax, as I told you, like all the waxes that are used for dental applications, we have paraffin wax. Okay. That's as a base, or sometimes some microcrystalline wax, 60%, the major component. Okay. From Viva point of view, also it's very important. Carnauba wax and candela wax or and candela wax 25%, saracen 10%, beeswax 5%, gum damar and colorants and pigments in very minute quantities. Okay. Now this is actually very important. That is the classification of inlay wax. Now inlay wax is actually that is used for dental applications given an ADA specification number 4. So we actually mainly have two types of inlay waxes. That is actually type 1 inlay wax and also type 2 inlay wax. So the type 1 inlay wax is actually mainly medium. Okay, medium inlay wax, that is actually medium inlay wax that is used for direct technique. So medium inlay wax that is means that it can actually withstand the melting range will be higher and the flow will be actually mainly lower at the temperature of the mouth. So yeah, so first I'll explain to you what you mean by direct technique. Okay, so direct technique means that direct wax technique means that a process whereby a wax pattern is prepared in the mouth directly on the prepared teeth. Okay, so you can see in this here we find that on the cavity that is prepared in the oral cavity, the wax pattern is directly prepared, isn't it? So these waxes will be actually subjected to a higher temperature of the oral cavity. Okay, will be actually a bit more higher. Okay, and so therefore we find that it should be able to withstand that higher temperature and the flow should actually also be less when compared to those waxes that is actually mainly used in indirect technique. Okay, so that is why I was telling that in type 1 inlay wax that is actually medium. Okay, direct technique exhibits a minimum flow at 37 degrees Celsius to minimize the distortion on removal from the mouth. Then type 2 inlay wax is actually mainly soft wax that is actually mainly used in indirect technique. So there we find that that has a maximum flow. Okay, maximum flow, because indirect technique means here we find that actually it is actually prepared on a die. Okay, it is actually prepared on the refractory die. Here is actually mainly prepared the wax pattern. Okay, so that is the wax pattern is actually procedure in this wax pattern is prepared on a die. So that is actually done outside the mouth. So it will be subjected to a lower temperature. Okay, so they are actually soft waxes, indirect technique that have a maximum flow at 37 degrees Celsius. Okay. And they are also classified as hard, medium, and soft inlay waxes. Okay, and the application of inlay waxes, they are specialized dental wax that can be applied onto the prepared cavity, that is direct, or to dice indirect, to form a direct or indirect patterns respectively. These patterns are used in the fabrication of indirect metal, not only metal. Okay, it can be used in ceramic and also indirect composite restorations such as inlays, crowns, fixed and removable partial dentures by the lost wax technique. Okay. So thank you. So with that, I'll be concluding my class. Thank you.